I am Laura Dixon, and you are listening to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast, episode number 61, Intrinsic Value versus What You Value. Welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. I'm going to teach you how to get out of your diet brain so that you too can be naturally thin for life. No counting, restricting, or obsessing. I am going to take the mystery out of it for you so that you can become naturally thin starting today. Are you ready? Let's do this. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you all about this concept of separating your intrinsic value from what you value, especially when you're losing weight, so that you can lose weight more quickly and keep it off more effortlessly. And before I get started, just a reminder, if you're enjoying the podcast and loving the podcast, if you can subscribe, write a review, and leave a review, that helps other women find the podcast. And I get messages from you all of the time telling me how much weight you've lost just listening to the podcast. So I've shared before, I love imagining a world where no one struggles with this, where we don't have the obsession and the energy drain. And then we can take that energy and actually do things that fuel us in our life and aren't draining us, like losing weight, dieting, obsessing, focusing so much on the food, what we're going to eat, what we're not going to eat, and then focusing on how we're going to lose the weight, right? We can take all of that mental energy and create more and relax more and just have more enjoyable lives. And so the podcast is a big part of how I help all of you do that. So when you write a review and leave a review, that helps the podcast suggest these episodes to other women just like you. So I say thank you, and I know the other women also say thank you in advance. So today when I talk about intrinsic value versus what you value, throughout the episode, I might use human value, self-value, intrinsic value, all interchangeably. So our intrinsic value, and intrinsic value in and of itself, is a measure of what something is worth. Like a lot of times we talk about intrinsic value in relation to a stock option and how we measure the intrinsic value of stock options. That's kind of what came to my mind first, was options and valuing options. So that's how we value an asset, like an option. But our intrinsic value as a human is also the measure of our worthiness, which is always 100%. It doesn't change. It's always at capacity, no more, no less. It's always 100%. It's always fully intact, just because you are alive and you are a human. You often think your intrinsic value is tied up and dependent upon the number on the scale. And I'm going to talk to you in this episode about how to separate that, how to separate your intrinsic value versus what you value, so that you're able to lose weight more quickly and keep it off more effortlessly, and because it's just not true that the number on the scale has anything to do with your intrinsic value. And many of you may know that intellectually, but you don't fully embody it if you see the number on the scale as anything other than neutral data. And so this is also you know, if you're tying up your intrinsic value and what you value, you're tying up what the number on the scale means about you as a human, what it means about your worthiness, as if it somehow impacts your self-value, your intrinsic value, your worthiness, if you feel a negative emotion when you get on the scale, like hopelessness or devastation, or you feel depressed or even discouraged. If you're thinking there's something wrong with you, I will never do this, why can't I just be normal? You know you're tying up your intrinsic value with what you value. So today, we're going to unwind all of that crap. There is your intrinsic value as a human being, which is always 100%. And then there is what you value. So I'm going to give you some examples outside of losing weight so that you can start to apply this to losing weight. Sometimes it's a lot easier to see this outside of our weight loss journey. So think about a child for a minute. Let's say a child throws a toy across the room at his sibling. You don't value that action. What you value is not your child throwing the toy across the room. What you value might be however you defined, quote unquote, playing nicely. But just because he throws the toy across the room, you don't all of the sudden think, ugh, his human value, his worthiness as a person is somehow diminished. No, you're like, I just don't value that action, that behavior. You separate the behavior of the child from him as a human being and his intrinsic value. You wouldn't ever tie up his worthiness as a human from his action of throwing a toy. And of course not, because you can easily separate what you value, the behavior, from his intrinsic value in that example. But then you get this confused with your own weight loss because you tie your self-value, your intrinsic value in with the number on the scale. You get them confused. And so again, you know you do this if the scale, the number on the scale, is anything other than a neutral data point. And the main reason I hear from all of you about why you don't want to do this, why you don't want to accept your intrinsic human value as being 100%, regardless of your weight, is because you think that if you do, you will put on more weight or you'll never lose the weight. But that actually isn't true, and the exact opposite is true, and I will explain why. But first, it is really important to see that your brain interprets intrinsic value sometimes interchangeably with what you value. And that there are many other times where it doesn't make that confusion. It doesn't actually think about them in the same way. So I'm going to give you 2 examples of how your intrinsic value is clearly separate from what you value. And then how if you don't separate them with losing weight, it actually makes it harder to lose weight and to keep it off. The 2 most common mistakes in tying up your human value, your intrinsic value, with what you value is usually with money and appearance. And so I'm going to use a different example from those and then come back to weight. But when we think about society and our culture, right, we're often taught to associate our human value, our intrinsic value, our worthiness with money and or our appearance. And again, we can look at our children and know that we would never do this to our 4-year-old child, right? We would never say to our 4-year-old, oh, you put on 5 pounds, there's something wrong with you, right? We never associate their weight with their worthiness. We're like, oh, they're a kid, right? We would never do that to our own child. Just like we would never say to our 4-year-old child, you're somehow less worthy because you're not making money yet, right? We wouldn't do that, but we do it as adults. And I'm going to teach you why it's so important to unwind that and to disassociate your intrinsic value with what you value, not just for your own mental sake, but also so that it makes it more likely and easier to actually create more of the thing that you value, whether that's losing weight or money or having a clean house or whatever it is. So first we are going to look at a quote unquote clean house as an example. Now that probably means something different for each of you, but imagine what that is for you. And if you don't value a clean house, then pick something else. It doesn't really matter what it is. What I value is a clean house. Side note, did not always value this, right? So what you value might be a clean house. That might mean no papers on the counter. That might mean you vacuum every week. I have no idea what that exactly means for you, but you want to know, okay, what you value is a clean house. And your house is probably cleaner some days than others. And then let's say you have 5 nieces and nephews that come over and they are playing with your kids all day. Now your house is a quote unquote mess. Before you clean it, while it's still a mess, you don't make your messy house mean that your value as a human being has somehow diminished. Because what you value, a clean house, isn't present right now. You can see how absurd that is, right? We can all intellectually agree that that's kind of crazy. But that's exactly what you do when the scale goes up 1 pound. It's like the messy house. You wouldn't tell yourself, I'm now less than as a human being because I had some people over and the house isn't as clean as usual. But that's what you do when the scale goes up 1 pound. You're like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I might be broken. This is never going to happen. I just want to be normal. All of the things. So even though what you value, the quote unquote cleanliness of the house has changed, you don't reduce your own intrinsic self-value. I also value time with my husband. But if we have a day where I took the kids to swimming lessons, let's say, after I worked all day, and then we eat a little bit later, and then we always do a bath or shower because of the chlorine and they get dirty and all the things. And so my husband and I only talk for, let's say, 15 or 20 minutes after the kids go to bed. I don't tell myself I'm a less worthy human being. My intrinsic value has somehow gone down because I didn't experience more time with my husband, which is what I value. They're completely separate. The same is true on the flip side. When my husband and I take a night and we go on a date together and we have way more than those 20 minutes together, I'm experiencing more of what I value, which is time with my husband. But again, I'm not believing that my intrinsic value, my self-value, has now somehow gone up. Right? They're completely separate. The intrinsic value stays the same at 100% always, regardless of whether or not I have more or less of what I value. So I want you to see how you already disassociate your self-value, your intrinsic value, your worthiness, your human value from what you value in many other areas of your life. And so however you do that in other areas of your life, you want to show yourself that you can apply that to losing weight. And I'm going to walk you through why that is so important as well. But the other thing too with this is then what you value can change over time because you haven't intertwined it with your intrinsic value. Because if you're intertwining your intrinsic value with what you value, it means they always have to stay connected. You're always going to be racing around to make sure that what you value, you keep doing that so that you can keep believing that your intrinsic value is always intact. But when you separate them, then what you value may change over time. So like I said earlier, I used to not value a clean house. And now it wasn't like that messy, but like having dusting regularly, doing some of those things, it genuinely wasn't something I valued. But now I do. And a lot of that has come with it's a natural byproduct of understanding my mind and cleaning up my mind and having a really managed mind that my tolerance for messiness has greatly diminished. My tolerance is not much. Right? So now what I value has changed over time. I used to not value a clean house and now I do. I also used to not value time with my husband because I didn't have my husband 12 years ago. Right? So what I value can change so much more easily because I haven't tied up my intrinsic value with what I value. Here's another thing before we get to talking about this with weight loss in particular, is that if you believe in God and a creator, or you believe in a universal creator or a universal intelligence, if you believe in any form of that, it's also a little bit of a slap in the face to think that you can somehow reduce your intrinsic value or add to your intrinsic value when you didn't create it in the first place, right? Your creator created you. And that is why you're always have 100% of your intrinsic value, 100% of your worthiness all of the time. It's always been there since you were created, and it will always continue to be there. It's also a little presumptuous to assume that you have that much power over your human value. If you believe in a creator, then you didn't even create you. So your value has always been there. It's always been 100%. So you don't have the power to add to it or reduce it. And here's the other thing. There's just no upside to believing that what you value, whether it's a smaller body weight or more money or a clean house or time with your husband, has any impact on your intrinsic human value. So like I said earlier, one of the reasons you might not want to get on board with this, your brain might have some resistance, so notice if that's you, is because you think that if you let go of the idea that the number on the scale has any bearing on your intrinsic self-value, then you won't actually want to lose the weight anymore. So you fear putting more weight on or never reaching your goal weight. But the exact opposite happens, and here is why. When you put so much pressure on yourself to lose the weight, to prove something as big as your self-value, you create so much emotional discomfort. Just think about all the times you've gotten on the scale and felt devastated because you made the number mean that there's something wrong with you as a human. Or you have sat in self-loathing or pity, feeling like you're never going to get out of this cycle because you must be broken. That is all because you're wrapping up your self-value into the number on the scale, into your weight. Your weight, losing weight, is just what you value, completely separate from your intrinsic value. So when you think about how you do this, how you create that pressure, and then we get really down on ourselves for when we're not losing weight, when you think about the only reason you ever overeat, your body in and of itself never wants to eat when you aren't hungry. Your body doesn't want to eat food that doesn't feel good. Your body doesn't want to eat past the point of being satisfied. Only your brain does. And your brain only ever wants to overeat because it wants a distraction. And what does it want a distraction from? It wants a distraction from an emotion, always. Whether it's stress or anxiety or pressure or guilt or shame or excitement or happiness or joy, or an urge or a desire to eat when you're not hungry. It's always, always, always an emotion. And usually, more often than not, it's the lower end of the emotional spectrum, meaning, right, an emotion that you're probably not as excited to feel. When you think about the guilt, the shame, the pressure, the urgency, the rush, all of those emotional experiences. And you create so much more of those emotional experiences when you tie your intrinsic value up in with what you value. So if the only reason you ever overeat is an emotion, and you tie your self-value up with your weight loss, up with what you value, you tie them all up together, and then you're feeling more guilt, you're feeling trapped, you're feeling pressure, you're feeling impatience, you're feeling rushed, you're feeling shame, you're feeling urgency, you're feeling regret and embarrassment and humiliation because you're putting all of this pressure on yourself to lose weight so that you can prove your worthiness. All of those negative emotions you will be feeling, you will want to eat to escape them. So there is no upside to tying your intrinsic value with what you value with losing weight. It will actually slow down your progress. Think about how you would show up to losing weight, to the process of losing weight, if rather than thinking, I have to do this, with the heaviness of that, I have to do this in order to prove I'm a worthy human being, instead of you thought, I just want to do this. What I value is being at a smaller body weight. What I value is feeling really good in my body. What I value is not experiencing the digestive discomfort. What I value is being able to handle my emotions, to be able to allow my emotions without food. What I value is a calm control around food. That's what I value. Think about going through the process of losing weight with that thought pattern, with that experience of, I just want to do this. I want to lose weight just because I want to, not because I have to prove that I'm somehow more worthy. What would happen is you would actually enjoy the process of losing weight so much more. And when you enjoy it, that means you're actually going to want to keep going. And you're not going to go through all of the ups and downs. And it would mean that when you do put a pound on, you can objectively evaluate exactly what happened and why, without making it mean something about your intrinsic value. And when you have that objectivity and not the heaviness of there's something wrong with me, shame, thought, and feeling, you don't need willpower to keep going. And you also don't end up in the F-it mentality. Think about my earlier example with my husband. If I said, I have to spend time with him, which is what I value, in order to prove my human self-value, how that time would be together. It would have so much heaviness and so much pressure. It would probably create disconnection, which is the opposite of what I want out of what I value, right? What I value is time with him, but really we could even say what I value is the connection with him that we create during that time. But the pressure of I have to do this to prove something about my self-value actually would have the opposite effect because it would create disconnection because I would show up so differently when I'm telling myself, I have to do this. Versus, I just want to spend time with him because I want to hear about his day, because I want to feel connected, because I value that connection. What I value is the time with him, the connection with him, completely separate from my value as a human. Imagine how different the interaction between us would be. How different, because I'm telling myself I just want to do this, separate from my intrinsic value, how I actually create more of what I want. I create more connection. I create a more enjoyable experience of being with him. It's the same with your weight loss. You create more weight loss. You create a more enjoyable experience of losing the weight when you tell yourself, I'm not doing this because I have to do it, because I have to prove my worthiness. I have to prove my intrinsic value. You're doing it just because you want to. Just because you value what you value is losing weight. Completely different from your intrinsic value. So while what you value may be a smaller body weight, I want you to make sure it isn't tied up in your intrinsic human value. Your intrinsic human value is always 100% intact. And even if you aren't quite still there, I want you to imagine how intertwining them will always backfire on you when you think about all of the heaviness of that. And so if you aren't fully there yet, what I want you to do is explore other areas of your life where it's really easy for you to separate what you value from your intrinsic value. And I want you to untangle them and then focus on what you value. When you really get to the place where, oh, my intrinsic value, my worthiness, it's 100%. I don't have anything to prove there. And then you just focus on what you value just because you want to, not because you're trying to prove something. You're going to create so much more of what you value. And it will feel like a weight off your body emotionally when you untangle them, which I promise will in turn be reflected in your actual body weight. All right, my friends, this is one of the concepts I teach you inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program. And I teach you exactly how to implement this change in your life, not just understand it, but really live it, to really truly embody the distinction between your self-value, your intrinsic value, from what you value, from losing weight. So make sure you listen to the link in the outro so that you can join us inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program. I will see you there. I hope you all have an amazing day, my friends, and I will talk to you all next week. Friend, if you are loving what you are learning here on the podcast, you have to come check out my Naturally Thin for Life program. It is my on-demand lifetime access program where I teach you brand new concepts not taught here on the podcast. And I will walk you through exactly how to implement all of the tools I teach you here so that they become just a part of you. You will learn exactly how to understand your specific brain and your specific body so that you become naturally thin for the rest of your life and you no longer struggle with your weight. Inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program, you can also receive live help so that you consistently make progress and reach your goal. I will teach you how to accelerate your naturally thin journey in a sustainable way so that the change becomes permanent. The best part is that it's risk-free. You either love it or I will give you your money back. If you are ready to finally be naturally thin for life, join us at lauradixoncoaching.com/work with me. That's LAURADIXON coaching.com and click on the Work With Me tab. I cannot wait to see you there.